So Abraham Lincoln said, too much agreement kills a conversation. So let me insinuate some partisan nature of this conversation. But in all seriousness, Democrat and Republican presidents have failed, in my opinion, to bring aggressive enforcement to the level that we need to deal with the large corporate concentration that's from the healthcare industry, from farms to pharma, let's put it that way. But I am concerned that we have an administration right now, and I agree with Mr. Alford's quoted in his testimony, the alliance between big business and big government must be broken. I have a lot of concerns right now with the president's alliance with certain big businesses, specifically Elon Musk. Is this kind of corporate connectivity, in your opinion, hurting average Americans?
Welcome back to the Hill debate, where today's spotlight falls on Senator Cory Booker's fiery exchange during a recent hearing. The senator raised alarm about corporate concentration in agriculture and questioned whether billionaire influence is undermining government accountability.
This whole hearing has been chaos, Democrats and Republicans working together and being generous and magnanimous. This can't stand in Washington right now. But I do have two quick questions. Unfortunately, I have to run, and I'm going to yield back to the chairperson. And Ms. Mecki, they're both for you, if you don't mind. So the first is just going back to Mr. Bullard's points about the Stockyards and Stockyards Act. I just really want to drive down, and he was saying very pointedly that there's some rulemaking processes going on now that would be a lot more efficient. Now, you helped bring the first Packers and Stockyards Act case the agency had brought in years. This was a lawsuit against the fifth largest poultry processor. We've heard from Josh Hawley about what's happened to the chicken industry in the United States, which is this massive consolidating going on, exercises of power that I found stunning and hurting poultry. In fact, I often think that what they're trying to do to the cattle industry is what they've already done to the poultry industry. How can the enforcement of the Packers and Stockyards Act protect farmers, ranchers, and cattlemen against what's happening in big ag right now? And in turn, I think your points earlier about consumer freedom, how could it help lower prices for consumers, in your opinion?
The Packers and Stockyards Act is a gold standard piece of legislation that actually was passed after the Sherman Act, and largely because Congress saw what the courts had done to interpretation of the Sherman Act and unduly narrowed it, and so gave the ranchers and farmers essentially a law that looks a lot like Section 5 of the FTC Act, which prohibits unfair methods of competition and certain so-called UDAP violations. And even then, you saw courts interpreting the Packers and Stockyards Act in ways that were unduly narrow. And so we did two things when we saw evidence that two chicken processors had really behaved in a borderline tyrannical manner in something called the tournament system, where chicken growers are kind of subject to these arbitrary rules and the whims of processors, even though they really have very little control over the yields that the chickens that they grow ultimately bear out in the market. And so we did two things. We looked out and we saw the Packers and Stockyards Act and reprised the role of the Justice Department as the lawyers for the executive branch, and had that delegation, that authority delegated over to us so that we could bring the first Packers and Stockyards Act case for the first time in recent memory, maybe ever. We could not find an example of the Antitrust Division bringing a Packers and Stockyards Act case. The second thing that we did, and I should say my former deputy, Michael Cadis, I think is in the hearing room and did extraordinary work with the USDA to start working on rules under the Packers and Stockyards Act to bring fairness to these markets. And so it is my hope that the Trump administration will continue that work and that effort to, again, just bring free markets and fair dealing to chicken growers and all of the other kinds of growers and ranchers that will benefit from that kind of rulemaking.
So Abraham Lincoln said, too much agreement kills a conversation. So let me insinuate some partisan nature of this conversation. But in all seriousness, Democrat and Republican presidents have failed, in my opinion, to bring aggressive enforcement to the level that we need to deal with the large corporate concentration that's from the healthcare industry, from farms to pharma, let's put it that way. But I am concerned that we have an administration right now, and I agree with Mr. Alford's quoted in his testimony, the alliance between big business and big government must be broken. I have a lot of concerns right now with the president's alliance with certain big businesses, specifically Elon Musk. Is this kind of corporate connectivity, in your opinion, hurting average Americans?
I think that the president's decision to bring in the richest man on planet Earth and give him what appears to be unfettered access to our federal agencies, our most sensitive, intimate financial data, and other kinds of information about the American people, really is a playground for potential malfeasance. And I think we started to see that as soon as Inauguration Day, where you saw the richest people on planet Earth in the Capitol Rotunda, warm, and the people who helped put Mr. Trump in office were outside, cold, unable to see what happened. And so it sends a message about who the president is for. And I think the antitrust agencies deserve to sort of rise and fall on their own merits and based on the decisions that they make with the authority that's entrusted to them. And I think that there are some examples of really good work there. There are other parts of the administration that really give me a lot of anxiety and a lot of pause about the incredible power that we've entrusted to the executive branch. And so whether it's Mr. Musk's ambitions in space, whether it's his ambitions in potential payment platforms, they're sort of the recipe for conduct that could really hurt people, and I think it deserves very close scrutiny.
When Senator Cory Booker took the mic during the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, his message was as sharp as it was urgent. America's agricultural markets are being swallowed by corporate giants, and Washington has failed to stand guard. Booker zeroed in on the poultry industry, painting a vivid picture of what happens when just a handful of companies dominate the field. He described growers trapped in unfair contracts, locked into a tournament system where they compete against one another but have no say over the terms. The result? Farmers lose independence, consumers lose choice, and the industry itself bends toward the power of a few corporations. It wasn't just theory. The Department of Justice had uncovered serious abuses in poultry, and after decades of silence, finally brought a case under the Packers and Stockyards Act, a law that dates back to the early 20th century. That law was supposed to ensure fairness in the marketplace, but court rulings had hollowed out its reach, leaving ranchers and growers vulnerable. Recent reforms by the USDA, however, could restore some balance if Washington has the courage to follow through. Booker's concern was clear. Without real enforcement, the same fate that befell poultry farmers could spread to cattle ranchers. And for consumers, consolidation almost always means one thing: higher prices at the grocery store with fewer alternatives on the shelves. But the senator didn't stop with agriculture. He pivoted sharply to a broader issue: the concentration of wealth and influence in America's political system. Booker singled out Elon Musk, questioning whether the richest man in the world has been given an open line into the federal government. This wasn't just a casual swipe. Musk controls major levers of the modern economy, from space technology to online communication, from electric cars to satellite internet. With business interests touching everything from national security to transportation, his access to decision makers raises the question: is policy being shaped for the public good or to serve billionaire interests? The witness didn't mince words in response. Allowing one individual such proximity to power, he said, creates obvious risks. It threatens to blur the line between democratic government and plutocracy, where influence is bought not through votes but through wealth. If regulators aren't truly independent, if they tilt toward billionaires rather than ordinary citizens, the public loses faith in the very idea of fairness. What Booker was really pressing on was this: whether America still has the political will to stand up to concentrated power, both in the private sector and in the political sphere. Corporate monopolies in agriculture hurt small farmers and drive up costs for families. Billionaire influence in government risks tilting the entire system away from accountability. It's a double-edged problem. Unchecked corporate consolidation squeezes the working class, while unchecked billionaire access corrodes democracy itself. For decades, administrations from both parties have promised reform. And yet, here we are. Farmers still struggle, consumers still pay more, and billionaires still sit closer to the levers of government than ordinary citizens ever could. Booker's questions cut to the heart of whether Washington is ready to finally break that cycle, or if the cycle will continue unchecked. That was Senator Cory Booker sounding alarms about both corporate consolidation in agriculture and billionaire influence in Washington. What do you think? Are billionaires like Elon Musk gaining too much control, or is this just politics as usual? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill for more of Washington's biggest debates.